Next, we have Dr. Steve Murawski. He is a professor at the Downtown Partnership, Peter Betzer Endowed Chair of Biological Oceanography at the University of South Florida College of Marine Science, and he is the director of the Gomery Sea Image Consortium. Go ahead, Dr. Murawski.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm pleased to be batting cleanup in terms of the consortia. My colleagues previously gave a great description of their consortia and also the interactions between the consortia and Florida, and I think that's pretty important. The Sea Image Consortium has been alive since 2011, and so we have a long history. We have 17 partner institutions. It's a very large consortium, 8 of which are local Florida institutions. They're down the center of this diagram. So you can see they include 5 public institutions and 3 private institutions. It also includes a very large international contingent, which I'll explain in a little bit. You can see that we are a very large, not only in terms of spread and institutions, but people as well. We have a wide diversity of different disciplines that are involved. It's sort of like a mini Gomery. We have a very wide remit in terms of our types of issues that we're getting involved with. So just in terms of this overview, I'd like to talk a little bit about what we did, or what did we do, what did we learn, what remains to be done. I think we all have to leave some breadcrumbs for the next set of analyses and people that will be following in our footsteps. Unfortunately, even with $500 million, there remain significant questions in terms of oil spill science. And then lastly, I want to focus on what we perceive our legacy and certainly Florida's legacy to be. So in terms of what did we do, there are a number of ways that one can approach any kind of large-scale investigation in terms of impacts and then making projections. And so our philosophy was basically to kind of work along all of the major modes of operation. And so we did a tremendous amount of in situ surveying and monitoring. And as part of that, we did comparative spatial analyses, both in the region where the oil spill was and then other regions in the Gulf of Mexico. This was augmented by laboratory-based experiments, and Martin gave a good recitation about the importance of combining laboratory experiments with field-based things. And we also fed numerical models. And this is really important because we can publish in all of these other domains, but until we can actually populate models that have a good predictive capability, we're still studying an event that occurred, as opposed to saying, all right, in the event of a new episode, how are we going to predict what the impacts are going to be? And so we did quite a bit of work in various disciplines in terms of both fish and sediment work, plankton work. We also worked in marine mammals, where we had a very significant presence there. We also worked on benthos. We did some field-based experimentation, both Joel Koska's work at Georgia Tech and Wade Jeffrey's work at West Florida. And then in terms of the laboratory-based experiments, we set up three major capabilities. One was at the TUHH, the Hamburg Institute of Technology in Germany, and then at the University of Calgary. These are high-pressure experimentation labs, and then also a exposure facility at the Moat Marine Lab, and as well an exposure facility in the Netherlands. So as part of our sort of recitation of what we've actually done, we mounted 13 major ship-based research expeditions to all the far points of the Gulf of Mexico. And you can see here, these are just the expeditions on in terms of the tracks of the Weatherbird 2, but we also used the research vessel Justo Sierra, which is a Mexican research vessel run by UNAM University in Mexico City, and then as well a number of chartered fishing vessels. And so you can see that our reach was very far and well beyond the Deepwater Horizon footprint in the northern Gulf of Mexico. And this becomes very important when we're trying to do comparative analyses of what went on. We also did quite a bit of work on small boat research vessel issues, particularly up in the north central Gulf of Mexico, looking at impacts on artificial and natural reefs. We also did some coastal sampling. I wanted to highlight this coastal sampling in the southern Gulf of Mexico. This was an expedition that we called the Tunnel Trek after West Tunnel. West Tunnel studied the impacts of the Ixtoc-1 oil spill back in 1979 and 1980 and occupied a number of coastal areas from the Campeche all the way around to Tamalpais, right? And so we actually were able to locate, with Wes's help, those exact locations to see if we could actually find deep Ixtoc-1 oil. And this was 35 years after that particular spill. And as you can see, we were able to find it, we were able to fingerprint it and identify it as Ixtoc-1 oil. This is really important because it tells us a little bit about, not only in this case, that what's going to happen in coastal areas in the northern Gulf of Mexico due to deep water, but we also did deep water investigations off Ixtoc, and that also tells us things about what went on. In terms of some of the work we did in the laboratory, this is the high pressure facility in Hamburg. And one of the unique aspects about this particular facility is that it was able to use live oil, which is basically methane saturated oil as opposed to dead oil. And most of the experimentation in terms of particle size distributions and other things have used dead oil. And what we found was that there's a very different behavior when the gas is outgassing from the oil droplet in terms of making small droplets than with dead oil. The facility also can be pressurized up to 550 bar. The Deepwater Horizon was at 150 atmospheres, right? So 1,500 meters. And so certainly we can do that and look at basically all pressure conditions in the Gulf of Mexico, which has a maximum depth of around 3,400 meters. And also we were able to simulate these rapid pressure drops. Deepwater Horizon with the blowout preventer had a pressure drop of about 84 bars over a very short period of time, over a very short reach of the blowout preventer. And this pressure drop actually helped stimulate the creation of these small droplets. So it's a very comprehensive test facility, in addition to the high pressure test facilities in Calgary and the University of West Australia. So what did we learn? And this is the short version. It certainly doesn't do justice to all different things. Number one, not all oil floats. Prior to Deepwater Horizon, whoever was looking for oil in the deep sea. And I'll talk about that in a little while, but clearly, as has been referenced before, a major part of the Deepwater Horizon oil ended up on the bottom. Number two, that deep oil plumes can and were created by the effervescence of the gas-saturated oil droplets, and not necessarily the addition of dispersants at the wellhead in subsurface dispersant injection. And this is really important moving forward in terms of response efforts. For fish, it's an oily Gulf. And by that, I mean, we did, in all the fish that we looked at around the Gulf, we always found evidence of hydrocarbons, but the Deepwater Horizon pollution was clearly apparent, particularly as we studied it over time. And this gets to the value of spatial and temporal baselines. Number four, it's happened before with Ixtoc-1, which was an oil spill of similar size. And it basically tells us that Deepwater Horizon oil will be around for decades. And last, one of the things that we've been able to conclude from some of our analyses is that most of the ad hoc oil spill response measures had serious negative side effects. And that includes things like the water diversions, sand berms, and arguably the SSDI as well. So just in terms of some of the operational aspects of what we did, if oil floats, why are we looking for it at the sea bottom? These are some of the sediment coring operations that we conducted, along with the fishing operations and cruises that we called the Mud and Blood series. And so here are the results of some of the sediment cores that we looked at. And you can see that on the left-hand side, this is a Deepwater Horizon core. this manganese oxide zone represents the accumulation of sediment, oil sediment on the bottom. This is a similar core that we took from the Justo Sierra, showing that the sediment was, the oxide zone was buried under about 4 centimeters of sediment, which is the sediment accumulation rate over 35 years. So we could clearly show that this event happened in the past. And so this demonstrates the axiom of geological science that the present is the key to the past, and the past is a window into the future. And I think that's one of the take-home things that we were able to determine. So in terms of the sediment discoveries, clearly there was a surface expression of deep water that translated into what we were able to observe in the sediment cores. And the interesting thing is a lot of this oiled sediment is actually moving down slope. You know, this was pitched on a very steep side of the canyon. And it also translated into things like enriched or dead carbon-14. And so we can do that in terms of its tracking of the footprint. And the mechanism, of course, that brought most of this oil, oil from Deepwater Horizon to the bottom was the oil marine snow mechanism, but also there was what we would call the toxic bathtub ring, and that is when the plumes themselves intersected with the slope bathymetry, you actually got a ring here. And so we can actually differentiate which part of the oil on the bottom was from snow as opposed to the grounding of the plume against the bathymetry. We are also able to reconstruct the past using archival satellite imagery. We're able to create a satellite image comparable to the Deepwater Horizon satellite images for the Ixtoc spill using the Coastal Zone Color Scanner, which actually only flew the year before the Ixtoc spill in 1978. So that was a really important aspect of reconstructing a spill that was very significant but very understudied. As was pointed out before, if you account for the part of the plumes that actually was under the sea surface, there was a substantial amount of oil that was very widespread. And this is a modeling study conducted by Claire Paris and her colleagues looking at the extent. And this, of course, is really important for the state of Florida. Even though we didn't have a lot of black oil on the beaches, it's very obvious that that oil did intersect with the West Florida shelf and had impacts on various biota. And so one of the things that our consortia has done is to simulate and forecast hypothetical oil spills, including this one off the extreme west coast of Cuba. And because now we have these modeling tools, we can actually forecast oil spills anywhere. And so, for example, we've done 4 or 5 different simulations of oil spills, including one right off the West Florida shelf. Part of our work at sea has also been doing fish-related studies, along with the simultaneous sediment coring. So we've sampled literally throughout the Gulf of Mexico, and you can see that the fish catches have been centered in the north central area. That's because we've done time series up here, but we've also contrasted it with these fish studies elsewhere in the Gulf. This allows us to do a wide variety of different calculations about the sustainability and the susceptibility of the various fish populations, and these are size spectrum analyses by country, and you can see that the size spectrum is much shallower in the Gulf of Mexico, implying higher species diversity and higher abundance at large sizes. And so that is really important from a fish population dynamics point of view. We were also able to look at pollution in the various species, and you can see a huge hotspot of PAH contamination in the north central Gulf of Mexico, but also some pollution in other areas as well. If you look at the graphic over on the right hand side, you can see who the dirty dozen are in terms of the most polluted species. And actually it's really interesting because the 2 most polluted animals in terms of PAHs are yellowfin tuna and golden tilefish, 2 species which had very little to do with each other, but imply that there are different mechanisms of oil pollution in these animals. In terms of priorities for the future, I won't dwell on this other than say that one of the things that we did was to try to consider from the point of view of different aspects of oil spills. And that includes initial siting of oil facilities, prevention, oil spill preparedness, response, and injury assessment, what we considered to be the most important priorities. And I'll emphasize that ICOPAR, which is the Interagency Coordinating Committee for Oil Spill Research, is currently updating their priorities, and I do think that the GOMRI community needs to comment on that. So in terms of our legacy, I do think that part of our legacy, and this extends not only to CIMAGE, but the rest of the group, we have better approaches to spill prevention. I think we know where the most risky places are in terms of geohazards and other things, and we can be helpful in terms of the agencies trying to determine strategies to prevent spills in the first place. Secondly, we have better models of spills when they do happen. That is the four-dimensional aspects of modeling. We have better tools to assess the damages to natural resources. I think because of the nature of our working relationships between government, industry, and academia, we will have a more coordinated response to the next large oil spill in the Gulf. We do have a more informed citizenry, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Clear to say, a wide variety of people throughout the Gulf are much more sensitive to the notion of what's going on out there, and also in terms of trying to prevent these spills. We certainly have a more closer relationship with our international partners, that is Mexico and Cuba. And then I think most importantly, we do have a well-trained cadre of students. To emphasize, there are lots of products that we all developed, and in our case, we have over 250 publications and counting, and including these 2 synthesis books that we produced, along with some of the other folks on the call who are co-authors. I wanted to emphasize this point about impacts on political decisions. We know that our and other partners in Florida had a really important impact on the constitutional amendment that state of Florida adopted to basically permanently ban oil and gas drilling in coastal waters. And there was a 68% voter support in what is, everybody knows, is a purple state. And part of the argument was the data that we all generated. And I would actually contend that this extends also to the change in the executive order for an additional 10 years of moratorium in the Western Gulf, based on the information supplied both in a bipartisan way to both Democrats and Republicans. We have a legacy of multimedia things like the podcasts that we did that were featured on Living on Earth. They're up and available, and certainly people can read them. We also supported the local arts community. We have a nice art collection which was featured in our books and also on display at the libraries, etc. We were able to interact with student communities, like this day we had with 23 graduate students in Cuba. These students have zero access to the deep sea, and so that was very important. I want to say that it is our great pride to leave this legacy. A tremendous number of graduate students, many of whom are working in this field now, and they will be the next cadre of responders. As was emphasized by Rita when she talked about Dave, there are 4 of our co-PIs that unfortunately didn't see us to the end. We certainly remember these people every day. They were incredibly impactful in terms of our contributions, and we'll always remember them for the tremendous contributions they made to CIMAGE and especially to GOMRI. And then last, bringing the scientific expertise together across the Gulf has been really our touchstone, and it's been our pleasure, and hopefully we can keep this going. So with that, I want to thank you all, and certainly thank GOMRI for the opportunity to spend their money wisely. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Murawski.